Hi! So this is following on from my previous video where I was responding to comments that were made on the TikTok I made reacting to a clip of the 12-minute interview between Andrew Tate and Muhammad Hijab. In this video, we're going to actually look at the whole 12-minute clip and I'm going to respond accordingly. They go on a couple tangents, so cut that out. Lego.
I wanted to ask you now, because this is the hot topic, especially in the Muslim community, about your conversion.
Yeah.
So tell us the story, like what happened exactly?
Well, I think a lot of people who've been following me for a while understand that I've been very respectful of Islam for a long time.
Yeah, sure.
I was born in a Christian country. I was raised as a Christian, and I've always been very respectful of Islam. And it's become more and more obvious to me and more pertinent that Islam is the last religion on the planet.
He rightly sees Islam as this aggressive movement in the world, hence why he calls it the last religion. In that he believes Islam will be the religion to endure because in the face of criticism or threat or mockery, it reacts, or its followers react violently and aggressively, and he values that. He believes that that is the proper, most masculine response to criticism and threat. That kind of a reaction sounds a lot like the kind of reaction we see from, say, gender ideology. Gender ideology isn't physically threatening, it's not physically aggressive, but it is socially and politically aggressive and threatening. If you criticize or oppose, say, transgenderism or transgender ideology, you will have your videos taken down, you will have your platform taken down, you'll be defamed by the media. It's the same. It's just that we live in a culture where the public square is no longer so much of a physical space, it's more of an online space. And so you see this same reaction played out in a different way, at least for the most part. What's quite funny is that he's sitting next to a man who called for his own followers to mass report two creators because those two creators hurt his ego and criticized and mocked Islam. Now, if the subject wasn't Islam, if it was gender ideology, and this happened and a group of activists mass reported two creators who were opposing gender ideology, critiquing it, mocking it, Andrew Tate surely would take the position of that's not right, because apparently he stands for free speech. From the get-go, things are already looking pretty hypocritical. This opinion of, Islam being the last religion because of the way it treats its critics. This opinion is based on his idea of what masculinity is. But that's his whole brand. Masculinity is his whole brand. The thing is, the last religion will be the true one. Truth endures.
It's just, for me, it feels like the last religion on earth. I feel like there's no other religion. People say to me, why did you convert? And I said, I don't really feel it as a conversion. It's almost like I knew God was real and now I've become religious. And they say, well, you were religious before. I was like, religious before how? Christian? What does Christian mean? Like, who's not a Christian? You go to Christian nations and everyone says they're a Christian. Look how they live their lives. Go into the average church. Is anyone actually fearful of God? Anybody? No, the girls are out on Saturday night drinking and then they turn up to church because their parents made them.
If you're a Christian and you leave Christianity because the Christians around you aren't taking Christianity seriously, you're the problem. You're the problem you're alluding to. The solution is take Christianity seriously. People are fickle. They are wicked. They are deceitful. And not everyone takes truth seriously. Most people put themselves above truth. Most people attempt to put their own interests, their own desires above objective reality. Most people make themselves gods. People's adherence to or belief in a thing doesn't determine whether that thing is true or false. Something that is true is just true. It correlates to reality. It is supported by objective evidence. It's objectively relevant. If the majority of people adhered to, believed in the transgender ideology, that doesn't make it good and true and something that we should all adhere to and believe in. If all the Christians in the world, or more realistically, if all the Christians you ever met weren't very good Christians, Christ still lived, died, and rose from the dead. Christianity is still true if all the Muslims in the world perfectly obeyed the Quran. Or again, if all the Muslims in your experience perfectly obeyed the Quran. Islam is still false.
The girls are out on Saturday night drinking, and then they turn up to church because their parents made them.
Out on a Saturday, church on a Sunday. This is very interesting to me. He's making a comparison here. He first says, look at the average church. There are girls going out on a Saturday night, getting drunk, doing whatever, and then they're being dragged by their parents to church on a Sunday morning. And then he immediately says there's no substance to the religion. So he believes that the thing that gives substance to a religion is the behavior of the people of that religion. The substance comes from the core belief in God and whether or not that's real. He then, making his comparison, says, look at Islam. They defend their ideas. So his decision is, at least in part, based on the behaviors of the Christians and the Muslims that he has experienced, that he knows of. That's a really weak foundation. And when he talks about defending ideas, he can only mean one of two things. He either means defending ideas intellectually, or he means defending ideas physically. He can't mean intellectually, because the apologetics empire, going all the way back to the apostles, Christians have been providing a defense for their faith from day dot. He clearly means physically, and he's correct. Islam is defended physically, violently. Historically, it is spread by the sword. It isn't fair to assess the validity of a religion by its weakest adherents. That's not to say that it isn't at all fair to look at the behavior of a people and come to some conclusions about the religion, as long as the behaviors you're witnessing actually reflect that religion's teachings. In Christianity, the Holy Spirit abides in the believer. The Spirit of God transforms the believer, conforms him to the image of Christ. If you don't see that transformation in a person, if you don't witness that transformational power in a supposedly Christian person, then you can rightly question whether or not they're actually a Christian. There are ways to tell if a person saying they're a Christian is actually a Christian. For instance, I went to school with a large group of Muslims. They probably made up the second biggest group of people. And the majority of them were having sex outside of marriage. They were drinking. they were swearing, they'd break their fasts, all sorts. One Muslim girl in particular invited a friend of mine to hang out with her with this random group of Muslim guys who were above 18. Bear in mind, my friend was about 14 or 15. My friend was drugged. She was unconscious. She woke up to one of these Muslim men, adult men, groping her. No Muslim would think that it would be a fair assessment of Islam, of Muslims in general, that Islam is false because look at these people, look how they've behaved, look what they did. Unless the behaviors we're pointing to, the behaviors we've experienced and witnessed, actually correlate to the teachings of the religion.
Like there's no substance to the religion. And also, Islam very closely reflects my personal beliefs. Through my personal life, I've learned that if you don't have standards and you're not a strong person who's prepared to defend his ideas, you'll be crushed.
Yes.
And we look at most religions in the world today, which are not prepared to defend their ideas. What's happened to them? They're just getting crushed.
If he was a Christian, and being a Christian, Islam reflected his personal beliefs, in what sense was he a Christian? Also, I agree, if you don't have moral standards in this world, you are a liability to yourself and to those who depend on you. We have to strive for goodness, for righteous and holy living. We have to have integrity. Christianity is a deeply challenging religion in that respect. Christ calls those who wish to follow him to die to themselves. It doesn't get any more countercultural than that. And so what I believe has happened here is that he's been raised vaguely with a sense of Christian values or some inkling of traditional values, which when we say that, we're referring to values that are rooted in Christian teaching and tradition. But he attributes them to Islam, because Islam reflects his personal beliefs, his view of himself, his masculine is distorted. The distorted self-perception of being a man is reflected back to him in Islam. So he can't see Christ. He takes the positive values and he attributes them to Islam. He's not considering Islam.
And now we have Christianity as an idea, which has basically said, well, we can't set any firm rules because everyone will just quit. So instead, let's make it so easy to be a Christian that nobody has to put any effort in.
Yeah.
And then accept everybody no matter what. And hopefully we can keep the church doors open. That's not God to me.
Yeah, that's not God to me either, nor to any serious Christian. Again, he's judging the validity of Christianity by the weakest of its adherents, or at least the weakest of those who claim the name of Christ. The Bible provides a detailed portrait of who God is. The most outstanding feature of God is that he is Father. He is a loving Father to all believers. God is wholly good. His goodness is unmatched. And because he is good, we can trust him, and we should trust him. God always has our best interests at heart, like a father toward his child. Everything that God does is an expression of his goodness. God is holy. Can't mess with him. His holiness is unequaled. You can never be good enough for God by your own merit. You simply cannot attain the level of perfection required to be in the presence of such holiness. There is no stain, there is no impurity in God. God is righteous. He exists in a state of moral perfection. He is perfectly just, loving, compassionate, gracious, kind, patient, long-suffering. God is truthful. He is truth itself. There is no falsehood, no lies, no deception found in him, which is more than what can be said for Allah. And there's so much more. Doing a study on the character of God isn't a study you reach the end of. In light of all of that, and especially in light of God as the Father, desiring for all to be drawn to him, it is super, super interesting that Andrew Tate doesn't see God in Christianity. Tell me about your father.
You know,
Yeah.
God to me is strong. God to me is something to be feared.
Yeah.
God to me is someone that people are afraid to mock.
Yeah.
God to me is someone that you have to go out of your way to prove something to. God to me has red lines.
Yeah.
Like God to me represents the Islamic faith. The Christian God to me, I don't see God. I can't explain. I don't see anything there. So
Yeah.
to me, it was the only logical choice in the end.
Godly fear isn't the same as fearing a tyrant. We don't need to fear his anger unless we fear punishment due to a bad conscience and an impenitent heart because of sin. To fear God is absolute reverence and awe for the Almighty, for the Holy One. His existence and his forgiveness should cause an inexpressible love and gratitude toward him, a reverence and a passion to grow in Christ. This should cause us to fear sinning against him because we want to be pleasing to him. We want to bring honor to his name, and we fear to grieve him, knowing how wretched sin is. And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in his ways and to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes which I commanded you today for your good. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil, pride, and arrogance, and the evil way and the perverse mouth I hate. So what? He's converting to Islam because people are afraid of Allah and they're afraid to mock Islam. I've dedicated quite a bit of my platform to criticizing Islam. You've got Hatun Tash, you've got Sam Shamoon, Christian Prince, David Wood. Many Christians are unafraid of critiquing, of mocking Islam. So let's be clear. No one is afraid of Allah. We all know why Muslims are afraid to leave Islam. We all know what happens to Christians when they refuse to submit to Islam in places like North Africa. We all know what's happening to women in Iran right now. Andrew Tate wouldn't accept this kind of reaction when it comes to leftist ideology. Again, you could say transgenderism must be true. We should all convert to transgenderism because people are so afraid to mock it and challenge it or oppose it. Therefore, it must be worthy of my respect and submission. What? This sums it all up for me. This is my take, ultimately, on the whole Tate and Islam thing. I believe his conceptualization of God comes from his experience of his own earthly father. It's obvious to me from the things he says here, from things he said about his upbringing, about his parents, that little Andrew feared his dad, that his dad was someone who he felt he had to prove his worthiness, his value to earn love, to earn the acceptance of his dad. But that isn't how a father should treat his son. There's a difference between building your son up, guiding him, disciplining him, sharing your wisdom with him, making sure he's not weak, making sure he can function in life, making him aware of reality. There's a difference between that and making him feel like he has no worth, no value, until he measures up to whatever standard you've put on him. He doesn't see God in Christianity because the God of the Bible doesn't reflect back to him his experience of Father. And there is no material value, material success with the God of the Bible. Christians are called to be in the world, not of it. Andrew Tate is very much content with being of it and succeeding in it by its rules. Maybe he thinks he can prove himself worthy of God's presence and favor, of salvation perhaps, if he in fact realizes the necessity of salvation because he's a sinner. But maybe he believes he can save himself, just like he had to repeatedly in the physical realm, not realizing that things occur first in the spiritual, then manifest in the physical. Mirrors.
Alhamdulillah, man. I mean, as you're saying this, I'm sure many people are like ecstatic and extremely happy. It's a great thing for everyone, honestly, because, you know, just anyone coming into Islam is you know, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ told us it's better than the world and everything in it. A lot of people have, you know, you'll be surprised at how many women as well, like, because obviously the accusations of misogyny and stuff, which, you know, but a lot of women, alhamdulillah, especially in the Muslim world, they're absolutely happy. In fact, let me tell you a story. Just before I came here today, one particular woman, I can't reveal her identity, but she's working as a school teacher in London. And actually, my friend told me that she was kicked out of school because they had this campaign against you in the schools. I'm not sure if you're aware of this.
I've seen, this was part of the cancellation. I did know about this.
Yeah. So in British schools, they said, you know, if you say anything good about this person, or you have to be reported or prevent anything. And if you say anything, you know, you have to kind of combat his extremism or whatever it may be, right? So because when you became Muslim, she abstained from doing that. She said, I can't really do that because, you know, Islamic laws and it's backbiting and it's got honor in Islam and so on. And unfortunately, they fired her from the position.
Wow.
This story, when I was listening to it, was just entirely frustrating. It's like you're leaving way too much out. You're leaving too many gaps for the audience to fill in, to the point where there's little to no benefit of sharing the story. He's making a serious claim that a Muslim woman was fired because she didn't actively criticize Andrew Tate. Like, this is just a story. There's no evidence. And there's no campaign in schools. A campaign against Andrew Tate. From what you can find looking into this ambiguous story is like articles about teachers sort of loosely being told, look, there's this guy who's blowing up on social media who's saying all sorts of questionable things and who has a dodgy past, and boys as young as 13 are consuming his content. Be aware. I personally wouldn't trust schools with truth, with any matter of truth, because they're so obviously compromised. This whole Andrew Tate influencing young teenage boys, this is primarily an issue for parents. If you have a young son and you're giving him free rein over any manner of online world, you are an idiot. What do you think he's doing? You certainly know what he could be doing, what he could get tempted into doing. And you either don't care, don't mind, or ignore it all and hope for the best. Don't be so passive. The battle for children's minds is real.
Even the basic things I teach, because some people have said to me, Andrew, all you teach about is personal responsibility, motivation, working hard, getting up and doing the right thing. I said, that's the absolute, those are the things they're most afraid of. If you teach people to have standards for themselves and to be morally strong people and to know right from wrong, then they can't brainwash you. Yep. So that's what they're most afraid of. They're most afraid of young men waking up and going, no, I don't believe that.
Yes, like all the young men leaving Islam in droves. His revert story, like absolutely every revert story I have ever heard, has nothing to do with Islam. Like, he hasn't converted for any good reason, or more importantly, any reason based on objective reality. Like, it literally seems to go against everything he has so far stood for, except, beating women and just altogether berating them.
Some people recognize when I converted to Islam that there was a time I was an atheist. There was a time when I was atheistic. And the reason I am now so absolutely certain that God is real is because I've seen evil. I've seen shaitan. I've seen it. When you see enough evil, you realize that there must be an equal and opposite force.
Evil isn't an equal and opposite force. That's dualism. Evil can't exist in its own right. Rather, evil is that which transgresses God, or the ultimate good. God is the ultimate force in play. There is no equal opposite.
And there are people out there in the world today doing the work of the devil, genuine demons, who are trying to destroy the baseline morality that's inside of all of us. We're all born with some kind of morality, and they're trying to destroy it.
And that's exactly the Islamic understanding, that we believe that you're born with something called fitrah, which is the initial goodness. You're born with an innate belief, receptivity to believe in one God.
Yeah.
And then that is corrupted. In fact, there's a prophet, hadith of the prophet, where he says, كُلُّ مَوْلُودٍ يُولَدُ عَلَى الْفِطْرَةِ. Every born child is born upon this initial goodness. فَأَبَوَاهُ يُهَوِّدَانِهِ أَوْ يُنَصِّرَانِهِ أَوْ يُمَجِّسَانِهِ. And then his father and mother, or his parents, they socialize him into Christianity, Judaism, Magiism. So the idea is that everyone is born with this initial goodness and this initial will or want to believe in God, one God. And then, as you mentioned, I mean, it's what you're mentioning here is profound, because you're mentioning a central doctrine in Islam.
I and reality disagree with this idea that people are born good, that we're basically good. And some hadith reveal that Muhammad didn't believe that children went to heaven, went to the good place. Narrated Aisha, a child died and I said, there is happiness for this child who is a bird from amongst the birds of paradise. Thereupon Allah's apostle said, don't you know that Allah created the paradise and he created the hell, and he created the dwellers for this paradise and the denizens for this hell. So when Aisha expresses her belief and expectation and happiness that when a child dies, that child will be a bird in paradise, Muhammad disagrees. He instead states that God has created some people for hell, that there are just some people who are destined for hell no matter what. And obviously, because context, he's including children. Narrated Abu Hurairah, the Messenger of Allah, may Allah blah 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 blah, said, every child is born on the fitrah, and it is his parents who make him a Jew or a Christian. Just as a camel is born whole, do you perceive any defect? They said, Messenger of Allah, what happens to people who die when they are very young? He said, Allah knows best what they used to do or would have done. So again, we see this idea of Muhammad's that Allah has created some people for hell. So even if they die as a child, it's no guarantee. I'm not sure paradise, at least the Islamic view of what paradise is, I'm not sure it's child-friendly. Besides that, when you think of a person who's committed a violent crime, do you take the view that that person bears the responsibility for his crime and should be punished? Or do you take the view that some external outside force made him do it? Like, that would be the way you make sense of a violent crime. That people are born basically good and that these evil external things drive them to do bad things. Bad things like a self-identifying, non-binary person with a criminal history and clear psychological issues, shooting up a gay bar while a drag show was going on, killing 5 people. That must be the fault of right-wing extremists, the external evil force making this poor non-binary person with a criminal history and mental issues kill. If you don't believe people are basically good, then you likely blame the criminals themselves. Sure, there are external factors, cultural, social experiences that affect the way that we behave, but we have choices. I don't believe human nature is basically good. If we're born good, why do you have to teach goodness? We have to make huge effort to teach children to be good, to make sure they grow up into good, functioning, useful adults. We're not basically bad either, though I believe in original sin we have a natural inclination towards sin, because at the heart of sin is this absolutely selfish desire, this desire to be like God. That's human nature. That's fallen human nature. We have the potential for great good. We also have the potential for great evil. I mean, look at babies. Babies are cute and adorable and, you want to bite them. Up until the age of 3, they're just entirely self-centered. Why? Because they're vulnerable and they need to be in order to survive. And we're supposed to train children in things like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And then, there's the whole human history argument. Read a couple of these things. The Ottoman Turks targeted millions of Armenian Christians for death during World War I. The German Nazi regime murdered 6 million Jews, including more than 1 million children and babies. The Soviet communist regime slaughtered about 5 million Ukrainians and about 25 million other innocents. The Chinese communists killed about 70 million Chinese and enslaved the rest of the Chinese people. The North Korean communist regime has built what one can only call the world's largest concentration camp. Don't tell me we're basically good. If people are basically good, why does every civilization have laws? Laws that control and or regulate human behavior. Why does a young, non-binary person shoot up a gay bar and kill 5 people? Because evil often accords with fallen human nature. If people are good, if they're basically good, in what or where does evil manifest? What is the agent of evil? Whenever we bring up an accusation of immorality, it involves or it's about a person. There has to be an agent of evil. It must manifest in someone. How would that happen if we're all basically good? Moving on.
And they're trying to program us all into slaves, and it's scary.
I remember when I was in my undergraduate days, and I was reading a particular book by this guy called Jeremy Bentham, who became the spiritual forefather of J.S. Mill, who is the father of social liberalism of today. And I remember reading this because it was so powerful, because it linked to something I read in the Quran. He said that, you have 2 gods. He said you have the God of pain and you have the God of pleasure. And I thought, this is so interesting. The Quran states, أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهُ هَوَاهُ. Have you seen the one who takes his own desires as a god?
You must be talking about the Prophet of Islam. That is Muhammad in a nutshell.
When I speak to atheists, they go, I don't believe in God. But they've signed up so hard to the liberal woke agenda. They're as religious as anybody, but they're just believing in the wrong things. They're believing in degeneracy, and they're believing in the work of the devil. So humans always need something to believe in. And it's a great thing you said about your own desires. It's like, one guy I was talking to since my conversion says, it's interesting that somebody with everything, all the Western world, everything somebody could want has now converted. And I said, yeah, because even before my conversion, I understood that hedonism is a black hole.
Hedonism is the Islamic paradise.
And I've always been a very disciplined person. I've never made mistakes.
I don't even know if that was some Freudian slip or if he consciously said that, but he didn't correct himself. Mohammed Hijab didn't correct him either. So what do we conclude from all of this? Well, his conversion is probably fake. But if it isn't, God help all the young men who follow him. I wouldn't advise any young, impressionable, immature man to seek advice or wisdom from Andrew Tate. Primarily because he claims to believe in a God, but presents himself as God to men.
I've never made mistakes.
The solution to the issues that men face today isn't become a millionaire, get ripped, have sex, berate women. Jesus is the solution to every problem because sin is at the root of all manner of evil. But people don't want a solution. They want to feel good. My name is Christ Defender. I defend the Christian faith. I answer questions and criticisms concerning Christianity. If you like what I do and you would like to support me, there are 2 links in the description box. One is to Patreon, where you can financially support me monthly. The other is a link to my Teesprings, where you can buy merch, such as all of these. The silly thing is that I can't afford my own merch, otherwise I'd be wearing it instead of showing it to you on the screen. But you lot, with your real jobs, you can afford it, so please do. Okay, bye!